If you're a new developer, you've probably asked yourself, what is the difference between an array, a dictionary, and a list? In this video, I'm going to show you what the differences are and where you should use them. Hey everybody, it's Francisco with The Dev Life. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new to the channel, I'm a self-taught developer with more than 10 years of experience. In this channel, we make videos for new developers like yourself with the intent for them to become resources. You want to know about arrays, dictionaries, and lists. Let's find out what the differences are. I've gone ahead and created a console application in Visual Studio, and the only thing that I have added is a class called collections class. I also created a class to hold an object for a user, which will contain the user ID, the first name and last name of a user. Also, in the main function for the console application, I instantiated that class. So the next step that we are going to do is I'm going to go ahead and define the constructor for this class. All I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to be instantiating this private variables, user1, user2, and user3, and I'm going to be adding data to them. So basically, I will be creating the users in our application. You can go ahead and skip. I'm going to add chapters to this video. So if you think this is boring, you could just fast forward to when we start talking about arrays and how to use them. Okay, so let's go ahead and define our constructor. The only thing we are going to be doing here is that for user one, we are going to be creating a new user class. And we are going to be setting the values for this user. So for user ID, we are going to go ahead and say this is going to be user one. For first name, we are going to use, let's do Johnny. And for last name, we are going to do Appleseed. For user two, we are going to be doing something similar. To save time, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this same code, and we'll just change the property values for each one of these. So this is going to be user two, and this is going to be John. Oh, I just realized I misspelled up here, so it should be spelled like that. So first name should be John, last name will be Doe. For the third user, user ID will be 3. First name will be Paul. And last name, let me see if you can guess the last name. Yeah, you're right, Bunyan. So now we have a constructor that will actually generate this 3 user classes or models for us. Okay, so now to get to the fun part, we are going to create a function, and let's just call it arrays function. So we'll know that in this function, we'll be working with arrays. It's not going to return anything, so therefore we're gonna say it's going to be a void class. And to use it from the console app, all we have to do is say collections.arrays function. And just to keep the console application open, let's do console readline, and this is going to have the application wait until we have some sort of input in the application. How do you instantiate an array, or how do you put together an array? So obviously, if you're watching this video, it's because you are looking for a way to work with collections of data, right? It could be a collection of primary data types, or it could be something a little bit more complex like this user class. I think that you have the need to work with a collection of either variables or objects. So how do we instantiate or create an array? In this case, we want to create an array that's going to hold 3 elements or 3 objects of the type user for the class that we just created earlier. Let's go ahead and do that. So this is how you'll do it. So you're going to have a variable. You could either do variable, or you could do user array, and then you give the name of the array. I'm going to call it users. This is going to instantiate a new array of type user with 3 elements in it. To begin storing the user profiles we created, we do it this way. So we say that users at location 0, which is the first location or index of the array, let's say that we want to hold user 1. And then of users of 1, we are going to hold user 2. And users of 2 will hold user 3. Okay, so now we have data in our array. How do we iterate through it? The most popular way of doing that is to use a for loop. So let's go ahead and set a for loop for this so we can iterate through the different elements. So we're going to set this up and we are going to iterate based on the variable I. And while the variable is less than 3, we are going to keep iterating and we are going to add 1 to the value of I on each iteration. Let's go ahead and print the value of each of the elements in the array as we loop through them. So to do that, let's go ahead and pull the variable out for the current user from the array. So at the location of I, as we're iterating, we are going to pull the value of it. So now this is going to be the user. And then we are going to print that out to the output screen of the console application. So here we are going to do user, and we are going to print out the value user.firstname. Actually, let's do the user ID first, and then a space, and let's do the user.firstname and the last name. Okay, and as I'm getting ready to run the application, I noticed that I made a mistake up here. So here I forgot to change the user variable. So I was setting, pretty much overriding user 1 each time that I was going through this. User 1, user 2, okay. Okay, so I think this should work. Let's give it a try. Let's try running the application now and see what we have so far. As you can see, we have all 3 users. This, I think, is a good way for us to store data. But what happens if you want to search and find a user, let's say by the ID or by the first name? Even if it's just by the ID, in this case, you're gonna have to go through the whole array, or at least a big part of it, searching through the elements one by one until you find a match based on the user ID. Arrays are simple. You can get them started, pretty quickly, but they're not very useful other than to just iterate through them and do something with the elements or with the data that you have stored in an array. So let's go to dictionaries now. These are similar, but not exactly the same. So let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, so now let's leave this function the way it is so we can reference it back in later in the video. For this, let's go ahead and create a function and let's just follow the same pattern. Let's call this the dictionary function. Okay, so in this one, the first thing we want to do is create a new dictionary. And again, we're going to call this users as well. And this is going to be a new dictionary. And the key is going to be an integer. And the actual data object will store, or the value in this case, will be a user. Okay, so now we have a dictionary. Now, how do we add elements to the dictionary? How do we populate it? If we reference the function that we created for arrays, it's going to be somewhat similar. So we are going to do users. We are going to add a new element to that, but we have to provide a key. So the key for the first user will be the user ID, and the value that we store for this element will be user 1. And we are going to do the same thing for all 3 users. But this time we're going to remember to change all the variables. So this is going to be user 2, and we are going to be storing user 2 at this location. Then we're going to have user 3 and then user 3 as well. Now that we have populated the dictionary, we could also iterate through it. So we could do something like this. So for each variable user in the dictionary, we are going to print out, we are going to do something similar to what we did in the arrays function. So we're going to go ahead and again write a line in the console, and we're going to get the user, and we are going to print the key, and from the value we're going to grab the first name, and we are also going to grab the last name. Okay, so let's go ahead now and run this function. So instead of calling the collections arrays function, let's comment that line out, and now let's invoke the dictionary function. So this should give us something very similar, and yes indeed, very similar to the output that we got with an array. Now this is very simple. Right now we just iterated, went each element at a time, and printed out the data that we're holding on each of the elements. Okay, so now the next exercise we are going to do is we are going to pull one of the data elements out based on the user ID. And this is the way that we do that. So now we don't have to iterate through the whole dictionary, right? Because your dictionary could contain 100 elements, 1,000 elements, or you know, a bunch of them. So you don't want to take the time to loop through all of them to find your match value like you would do with an array. Using a dictionary gives you the ability to go directly to the item that you're looking for and retrieve it. And this is the way we do it. So we have to declare a new variable of type user. The first thing we have to do is declare a variable of type user, and let's set it to null. We are going to catch the result, and let's try to retrieve the object from the user, and for that we use the try get value. We will pass the value of the key that we used to store the item. In this case we said we're interested on retrieving John Doe, which is user ID number 2, and we're going to tell this function or method to store the value if it's found on the variable that we just created. Then we're going to add a condition here that if a match was found, let's go ahead and print it out just like we did before when we iterated through it. So let's go ahead and do this. This is going to be slightly different. So this is going to be user ID. We don't need to reference the value here nor here. Okay, let's run this, and I'm going to put a breakpoint here. Okay, so as you can see, this executed, and it's telling us that it in fact did find a match. So if we let the application continue, we see that we did print out the value John Doe, which is a match that we got. Now, what happens if we look for a user ID that does not exist? So let's say that we try to retrieve user ID 1000. Let's go ahead and execute that. And you'll see that the application didn't find a match for user ID 1000. Therefore, we don't print anything. And as you can see, nothing was printed out, and the application's still waiting for me to do some type of input. So now we went through arrays, we went through dictionaries, and so far I'm liking dictionaries more than I'm liking arrays, at least for the flexibility, right? So whatever an array does, a dictionary can do, and a little more, right? So now let's go to lists. And now you're gonna find out why I prefer to use lists whenever I can. Same thing as we've done before. Now it's going to be a list class, or list function, excuse me. So we're going to be doing something similar to what we've done here. We are going to be creating a list, and this list is going to hold users, or the user type. We're going to call it the same name, and we'll instantiate it. Now, the way that we add elements to this list, or to any list for that matter, is similar to a dictionary, with the difference that you don't have to specify a key. You simply add one item after the other, and you don't have to worry about specifying a key. Now let's do the same exercise we've done with the other two collection types, right? So let's iterate through it. How do you iterate through a list of objects? Very easy. So in this case, for each var user in users, and we're going to do the same thing we've been doing. We are going to print out the users and the list. And that's it. That's all you have to do. So pretty much you loop through them one by one, and then you pull the values out. So let's go ahead and run this. Oh, actually, there's a small change I have to do. We have to change the function that we are calling here. And now it's going to be the list function. All right, now we can run the application. As you can see, just like we did with the other ones, we have the same output. We're outputting all of the users in the list. What if you want to find the second user in the list, just like we did with the dictionary by using the user ID value? So let me comment this out, and I'm going to show you how you can search through your list. So you want to return the user who contains the user ID with the value of 2. And this is what you do. One line of code, and then let's output it. And there you have it. So now we retrieve the second user just like we did with the dictionary. Another cool thing with lists is that you're not limited to be able to search only by the key or the user ID in this case, like we did in the dictionary. With a list, you can search pretty much by any of the properties that you have in your data object. So for example, let's say that you want to retrieve all of the users that the first name. Let's say that you want to retrieve the users whose first name is Paul. Let me show you how you would do that. There could be multiple matches in your data set. So we have to assume that they could either be one or more results or none for that matter, but it could be more than one. So we have to set it up that way. So we're going to create a variable called match users. And we are, like I said before, we are going to retrieve all of the usernames or all of the users with the first name Paul. So this is how we would do that. And since comparisons are case sensitive, we have to make sure that we either convert to lower or to upper to make sure that we find a proper match. In my case, I'm going to use lowercase, and I'm just going to say Paul. And whatever matches we find, we are going to retrieve them or return them as a list. And then we're going to loop through the results, and we are going to print them out. So we already have code for doing that. I'm a lazy developer, or I'm a lazy programmer, so I'm not going to retype everything. I'm just going to rename this variable here, and that should do what we need the application to do in this case. So let's go ahead and run the application and see what we get. Okay, as we expected, out of the 3 users, there's only one user whose first name is Paul, and there you see the output, Paul. Another type of search that you can do is you can search to retrieve any names that, for example, contain as letters or begin with the letter. So let's do a search for users who contain the letters J-O in their first name. We already have some of it already laid out, and the only change that we need to do is here. So here we are going to again convert the first name to lowercase, and we're going to say that we want the first names that contain the letters J-O. So this, in theory, should return Johnny Appleseed, and it should also return John Doe. Let's go ahead and run the application. And there you have it. In conclusion, lists are my favorite collection to use. I tend to gravitate to using lists. And the reason is because sometimes I start using an array or a dictionary, and later when the application matures more, I find out that I have the need to search by another property value or search through or iterate through the list to return different values. So in my opinion, I think most of the time you will be safe using a list, and at the same time you will be having all these possibilities that you can do with lists, right? That you don't have with the dictionary or an array. Thank you for sticking around until the end of the video. I would really appreciate it if you gave us a like. It would really help the channel out. And don't forget to subscribe. Catch you in the next one. Are we done? Was that it? Was that good, you think? Yeah, I hope it was okay. I think it was good. Yeah, they'll subscribe. You don't think so? No, they will. You will, right? You will. Yeah. Okay. Bye.